Another important shape we need to learn how to draw is the cylinder. Like the square, we're going to go through a step-by-step process which will help us draw this shape with precision. Though this process may seem elaborate, recognize that with practice it will become much easier and even second nature. Furthermore, as you build a stronger connection between your eye and your hand, you'll have to rely less and less on this process. So let's go through our strategy for drawing a cylinder first, and then deal with it from observation. The first step in this process is the same that we would use for absolutely everything. We're going to use our proportion measuring tool to measure the width of the object, and then see how many times the width fits into the height. When I use the proportion measuring tool, I realize that the width fits almost exactly twice into the height of my object. So I'm going to draw a rectangle with the same proportion. 2 widths equal 1 height. The next step is to deal with the proportion of the round shape on the top of the cylinder, which is called an ellipse. I'm going to measure from the very back of the ellipse to the front of the ellipse. That's the line that's represented in yellow. And then I'm going to see how many times that distance fits into the red line, which represents the width of the ellipse. In this case, when I line up my pencil with a yellow line, I see that it fits about 3 times into the width of my ellipse. Now that I know the proportion of my ellipse, I'm going to draw a rectangle with the exact same proportion. I'm going to draw a rectangle whose height fits 3 times into the width. Now that I've drawn a little rectangle into which I'm going to place my ellipse, I'm going to add additional guidelines to help me along. That's going to be the vertical and horizontal axis. So draw a line through the middle of the rectangle vertically and through the middle horizontally. The vertical and horizontal divisions help me figure out where my ellipse needs to touch the side. It also helps me create a symmetrical shape, so whatever curve I have on top in the upper half is going to repeat in the lower half. The bottom ellipse is a little bit trickier because I can only see half of it. I'm going to use my horizontal alignment tool to figure out where it starts at the corners, and that's going to help me establish the dimensions, the proportions of the curvature that I need to draw on the bottom. Now I'm going to draw another little rectangle that represents the dimensions of the bottom ellipse. Notice that this rectangle represents half the ellipse, which is only half that we can see. Now that I've drawn the rectangle, I'm going to use it to guide me in drawing half the ellipse on the bottom. Notice that the bottom curve is slightly curvier than the top. I'll explain why this happens when I do a demo from observation. The one thing I omitted to do is to draw a vertical line through the middle of the rectangle to help me figure out where the curve touches on the bottom, but just imagine that I did so. Now that we've gone through the process of how to draw a cylinder, let's try it from observation. The first step is to treat the cylinder as if it's a rectangle. We're going to get the general proportion of the object by measuring its width, and that I can do really anywhere. Tip of the pencil goes to one side, thumbnail slides to the other side. Then I'm going to rotate my pencil and then move it down until my thumbnail is perfectly lined up with the bottom curve. Then I'm going to look up. Where is the tip of the pencil against the cylinder? Memorize that spot. Move your arm up again so that your thumbnail is where the tip of the pencil used to be. Alright, so we've got 2. Then remember where the tip of the pencil is. It looks like it's at the front of the top of the ellipse, right? The front of this curve. Let's move the pencil up again. My thumbnail goes to where the tip of the pencil used to be. Now let's look at the length of the pencil and think about where the back of the ellipse, the back of the curve, lines up against the length of my pencil. It looks like it's about 1/3. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the width from one side to the other fits once, twice, 1 1/3 times into the height. Now we're going to draw a rectangle that is the same proportion. Measure out the width. Don't forget the sketch, right? So that's going to be a horizontal line. That's going to represent the width of my ellipse. Now I'm going to start drawing lines going up. Check your verticals. Going up like this. And now we're going to use our hand calipers to go, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, where's a third? Right about there. Let's try that again. Here's 1, here's 2, and 2 1/3. All right, now we have the general proportion of the object. Keep in mind, when you're using the proportion tool, the first thing you do is to measure the width to height relationship of anything you're about to draw. Whether it's a vase or a person, width to height relationship is the most important thing. So that's what we're doing with our ellipse, with our cylinder, excuse me. The next step is to get the proportion of the top of our cylinder. That's going to be an elliptical shape that looks like this. How do we do that? By using our proportion measuring tool. We're going to measure from the top to the bottom and see how many times this distance fits across. Once, twice, 3 times, maybe 4 times. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to move a little bit closer so you can see it better. So I'm going to line up the tip of my pencil with the top of the ellipse. My thumbnail moves down so it lines up with the bottom of the ellipse. And now I'm going to see how many times this distance fits across. I'm going to rotate my pencil like this and count out 1, 2, about 3 times. So the distance from the top to the front here fits 1, 2, 3 times across. How do we use this information? Here is the width of our ellipse, right? It needs to be this wide. We know that this distance, right, the distance from here to here, needs to be about 1/3. So if we find 1/3 here, here's 1/3, here's 1/3 again. I'm trying to draw through my phone here. 1, 2, 3. We take that 1/3 and drop it down and draw a little rectangle like this. Now we know that our ellipse, our curve, needs to fit within that rectangle. Right? So anytime we're drawing a complicated shape, the first thing we do is figure out its general proportions. We've got this kind of complicated ellipse. We get its proportions. We draw a little rectangle that represents its proportions. And that's going to help guide us in drawing our ellipse correctly. Now, here's the next step. We know that an ellipse, the shape, is basically a flattened circle. It's a circle that we're looking at from an angle. Let's draw a circle. Okay, not a bad looking circle. We know that if we draw a square around that circle, like this, that our circle is going to touch at 4 points and nowhere else, right? An ellipse is a flattened circle. So in this case, we know that this shape is going to touch at 4 points. We're going to draw a vertical line right through the middle of our rectangle. So now we know that our ellipse is going to touch here and here. And now we're going to draw a horizontal line to figure out where the ellipse touches here and here. So now we have our 4 points where our ellipse needs to touch. All right, that's going to help guide us. So now when I draw this ellipse, I'm going to sketch it in. It's going to start here, curve up, touch here, curve down, touch here, curve down, curve down. This is going to help me get this shape to look symmetrical. So whatever curve I have here is going to repeat here. Whatever length I have here, I'm going to have here. Right? So I'm not going to have a weird wobbly ellipse. It's flatter on one side and curvier on the other, which is incorrect. And it's going to help me get the right width to depth relationship in the ellipse. Again, don't forget to sketch. Right? So I'm working a little bit more dark than I normally would. Work light. When you're drawing the ellipse, 2 big mistakes you want to avoid. Right? Here's a really common one. The student sketches in a rectangle, like this, finds the vertical and horizontal axis, good, marks off the 4 points, also good, and then does this. Okay, no good, because you see how the ellipse is touching all the way here and all the way here. This is no longer an ellipse, this is a cocktail weenie, right? Like a little sausage, right? So no sausage shapes when you're drawing ellipse, please. Don't do that. And then here's another really common mistake. You draw your rectangle. Thusly, you mark off your 4 points, and then you do this. The problem with this one is that your ellipse has really pointy edges. So that's no longer an ellipse, that's a flying saucer. Right? An ellipse has a gradual curvature, which means that it gently curves here, then as it works towards the sides, it gets curvier and curvier and curvier, and then you have a smooth transition into the walls of your cylinder. Right, so under a microscope, it looks like this. Boom. Not this. Right? There's a bump here. That means your ellipse is too sharp. Okay? So, no sausages. No saucers. No flying saucers, please. All right, almost there. Now we need to draw the bottom ellipse. The bottom curve here. Now that's a little bit tricky because we can only see a part of it. Right, look at the bottom. See, we can only see a little part of that ellipse. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna use our horizontal alignment tool and line up our pencil where we see the ellipse ends. Here and here. That's going to be a horizontal alignment. Think about where that is on your drawing. That's going to be right about here, I think. Mark off those 2 points, like this. And then draw a rectangle. Drawing through my phone here. All right, in this case, because we're only drawing half the ellipse, all we need to do is find our vertical axis. And now we know that this ellipse needs to touch here, and we're only drawing half of it, right? There's the bottom. Notice the difference between the top and the bottom curve. Notice that the bottom is a little bit curvier. That's an important element. Do not make the ellipse here the same as the ellipse here. That is a very important principle. If, let's say I'm standing here, and I'm looking at the ellipse at eye level, meaning that the top of the ellipse is perfectly lined up with my eye. Let's do that really quickly. I'm going to find my ellipse here. Oy. Okay, so right now, my ellipse is at perfect eye level, right? The more the ellipse gets lowered, the more it opens up. So, because the top ellipse, this one, is higher, it's closer to your eye level, it's going to be a little bit flatter than the bottom ellipse, which is lower. Does that make sense? This is going to be flat, and then gradually, little by little, the ellipses get curvier and curvier and curvier. So one here might be much curvier than the one up here. Okay, so make sure your ellipses are not the same. Once I've got my cylinder sketched in, now I can switch to either my writer's grip or adjust my thumb and forefinger grip and put in a darker line. Always remember to sketch. That is the biggest mistake you could make at this point. Bigger than mistakes in measuring, bigger in not getting your verticals straight enough. The main mistake right now is not sketching, not working lightly enough, because if you don't learn how to sketch, it's going to be very difficult to make corrections. And as artists working from observation, you're always making corrections. I'm going to have this diagram available for you to download, which will refresh your memory as you practice. The next step is to draw cylinders at different heights from observation to get used to this process. I recommend getting very comfortable drawing cylinders because they, like cubes, are not only everywhere in the man-made world, but are also very common in the natural world, and are often used as a starting point, as a simplification, when drawing very complex subjects such as the human form.